There is an old adage in journalism that every story has three versions: yours, mine, and the truth. For exceptionally tall, inherently optimistic, and brightly dressed journalist Alice Scott, uncovering the truth is a lifelong passion. Her ultimate dream is to write the biography of Margaret Grace Ives, the elusive former socialite and tabloid princess who vanished from the public eye 2 decades ago. Following a tip from an obscure internet message board, Alice travels to the sweltering, picturesque Little Crescent Island in Georgia. There, she finds an 87-year-old Margaret living under the pseudonym Irene Mayberry. Margaret has shrunk a few inches with age, but is surprisingly muscular, sporting mousy silver hair and a sly, enduring sparkle in her pale blue eyes. She lives a secluded life, creating sea glass mosaics, aided by her brusque, gray-haired, and fiercely protective housemate Jody. Alice pitches an authorized biography, begging Margaret to finally tell her own story. However, Alice's dream hits a massive roadblock when she walks out of Margaret's house and comes face to face with Hayden Anderson. Hayden is a hulking, hawk-nosed, dark-eyed Pulitzer Prize-winning biographer who dresses in austere monochrome and hides a tender heart behind an impenetrable, stoic glower. Margaret proposes a ruthless trial. Both writers will stay on the island for a month, conducting alternating interviews and submitting proposals. Only one will win the job. Despite their intense professional rivalry, Alice and Hayden are staying at the same seaside hotel, making it impossible to avoid one another. Hayden is intensely private, guarded, and prefers to sit in the defensive corners of diners, whereas Alice is a bubbly open book who wears her heart on her colorful sleeves. Slowly, their icy dynamic thaws. They bond during late-night diner runs after a false fire alarm at their hotel, sharing pieces of their pasts. Alice opens up about her eccentric, hippie parents and her sister's childhood illness, while Hayden confesses the crushing pressure he felt growing up as a politician's son, trying to project a perfect image to protect his mother, who suffered from severe, secret depression. Meanwhile, they also meet Captain Cecil Wainwright, a bald, gap-toothed older man in a bucket hat who runs a kitschy local restaurant called Fishbowl and who seems oddly invested in the two writers' presence on the island. As the month progresses, Margaret begins unraveling the dark, glaring tapestry of the Ives family history to Alice. It is a story of wealth, betrayal, and generational curses. It began with her great-grandfather, Lawrence Ives, a ruthless prospector who built a fortune by betraying his mining partner, Thomas Doherty, and then purchased newspapers to bury the scandal, effectively launching the Ives media empire. Lawrence died a miserable man, raving with guilt and calling out for his estranged sister, Nicolette, the only person for whom he would have given up his wealth. The empire passed to Margaret's grandfather, Gerald Ives, a cold and calculated man who expanded the family's power by monopolizing the press. Gerald engaged in a passionate, long-term affair with an actress named Nina Gill. When Nina became pregnant, Gerald sent her to the Swiss Alps to deliver in secret, avoiding a scandal that would have ruined his political ambitions. They brought the baby, Ruth, back to the opulent House of Ives and raised her as Gerald's niece. Margaret then recounts the story of her own parents, Freddie Ives, a directionless playboy, and Doris Bernhardt, a tall, angular, no-nonsense female film director. Freddie fell madly in love with Bernie's fierce independence, and though their marriage was unconventional and ultimately ended in a highly publicized divorce, they remained deeply devoted best friends until the end of their lives. Following the divorce, Margaret and her timid, bookish younger sister Laura were left adrift in the gilded cage of the family estate. Laura became pathologically isolated after their beloved cousin Ruth tragically died in a plane crash. Hoping to shake her sister from her depression, Margaret sneaked Laura out of the estate to attend a concert by Cosmo Sinclair, the famously charismatic and sweet-natured boy wonder of rock and roll. The concert turned into a terrifying, violent riot as crazed fans rushed the stage. Laura was injured in the crush, and the sisters returned home only to discover their grandfather Gerald had died that very night. Riddled with guilt, Cosmo Sinclair personally visited the estate to apologize. He and Margaret fell wildly, instantly in love, recognizing in each other a shared desire for a simple, honest connection amid the chaos of fame. They eloped, but their happiness was marred by Laura's descent into a doomsday cult led by a manipulative charlatan named Dr. David Ryan Atwood. Bravely, Margaret met with her brainwashed sister at a dusty diner to orchestrate a rescue, leading to an FBI raid that dismantled the cult. Though Laura testified against her captor, the intense media scrutiny left her a shattered shell of a person. She eventually fled to Switzerland with the family's trusted physician, Dr. Cecil Wainwright, severing all contact with Margaret to escape the toxic blast zone of the Ives family name. Margaret and Cosmo's marriage was a beacon of light, but they were relentlessly hounded by the paparazzi. The tragic climax of Margaret's life occurred on a Tuesday when she experienced agonizing abdominal pain and a soaring fever. Believing it was a medical emergency, a panicked Cosmo loaded her into his car and sped toward the hospital. Ruthless potographers chased them through the streets, causing a catastrophic collision. Margaret woke up in the hospital to learn she had merely suffered from appendicitis, but the crash had killed the absolute love of her life. Blamed by the press for her husband's death and drowning in grief, Margaret became a recluse, eventually staging a series of failed escape attempts before permanently disappearing to Little Crescent Island 20 years ago. As Alice diligently records these agonizing histories, she and Hayden foam deeply into a clandestine romance. They steal moments on the beach and in dark hotel rooms, their physical and emotional connection undeniable. Hayden even accompanies Alice on a weekend trip to her childhood home, effortlessly charming her pragmatic, earthy mother. During a moonlit walk, Hayden confesses that he is in love with Alice, though he fears the impending decision over the biography will inevitably shatter their relationship. Despite her infatuation, Alice's journalistic instincts begin to tingle as she spots glaring discrepancies in Margaret's flawless narrative. Margaret referred to an old family hotel by its modern name, the Ebner, rather than its historical name, Nicolette. Furthermore, Alice discovers a tiny, exquisite sea glass mosaic in a local gallery, crafted by Margaret, titled Nicolette. When Alice analyzes historical footage of Laura's cult trial, she realizes that the family physician, Dr. Cecil Wainwright, is actually the island's local restaurant owner, Captain Cecil Wainwright. The final puzzle piece slots into place when Hayden casually mentions that his adopted mother, born in 1967, is named Nicolette. Armed with these terrifying connections, Alice confronts Margaret. The truth spills out in a heartbreaking confession. Margaret never had appendicitis on the day of the crash. She was pregnant. After Cosmo died, she realized the rabid press would completely consume her child's life, just as it destroyed her husband and her sister. In a desperate act of love, Margaret enlisted Dr. Cecil to save the appendicitis story. She spent her 2 years of grief-stricken isolation, secretly carrying and delivering the baby, whom she named Nicolette. She then gave the child up for a closed adoption to protect her from the Ives family curse. Decades later, Jody, who is actually Laura and Cecil's biological daughter, tracked Margaret down. Hoping to ease Margaret's immense loneliness, Jody urged her to seek out her lost family. Margaret discovered her grandson, Hayden, was a successful writer. She orchestrated the entire fake biography pitch solely as a ruse to bring Hayden to the island so she could meet him. She never intended to write a book. Margaret tearfully begged Alice to keep the secret. Hayden had already informed Margaret that he was dropping out of the competition because he didn't want to jeopardize his relationship with Alice. Margaret is terrified that if Hayden learns the truth, he will reject her, just as she fears her own daughter would. Bound by her strict non-disclosure agreement and an ethical belief that Margaret owns her tragic story, Alice is trapped. When Hayden comes to Alice's door to celebrate giving up the job for her, a devastated Alice lies, telling him that she no longer wants the job either, but she refuses to explain why. Believing Alice is shutting him out, a heartbroken Hayden leaves the island. Alice retreats to her mother's rural farm, completely shattered. Over several weeks of gardening, cooking, and archiving old family photos, Alice mends her strained relationship with her mother. She realizes that her mother's pragmatic nature was never a rejection of her vibrant, pop culture-loving life, but simply a different language of love. Empowered by this healing, Alice sits down and writes a letter to Margaret. She pleads with the older woman to tell Hayden the truth, emphasizing that when you love someone, you must be willing to unmake the world and build a new one to give them what they need. She describes Hayden's wonderful, generous nature, and concludes the letter by confessing that she loves him with every fiber of her being. Weeks later, the sun is setting over the farm when Alice opens the front door to find Hayden standing on her porch. He is clutching her handwritten letter. Margaret had sent it to him, along with a letter of her own explaining his true lineage. Hayden sweeps Alice into a desperate, passionate kiss, declaring that he doesn't care where they live or what jobs they take so long as they are together. Adapting the lyrics of his grandfather Cosmo's famous song, Hayden pulls Alice close and whispers that it will be Alice on his mind, Alice all the time. In the end, Alice and Hayden marry and write the biography together, a book that honors the truth of the Ives family while fiercely protecting Nicolette's privacy. They welcome a daughter of their own, Laura Grace Anderson Scott. Surrounded by love and the mended fragments of a broken past, Alice embraces the beautiful, unpredictable, and unicursal labyrinth of life.